Hello. Hello, Jeremy.
Hello, how's it going?
Great, great, great. Hello, everyone who's out there who might be watching. I'm Tara, founder of D&D in a Castle, and today I am here with lovely Dungeon Master Jeremy Cobb, who is a longtime Dungeon Master of D&D in a Castle, who is going to be back with us this fall and again next spring. So we're here to hear about all things D&D. How are you doing this afternoon, Jeremy?
I'm doing well. I'm excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Great. We're very excited to have you. So tell us, first of all, how you came to be a Dungeon Master at D&D in a Castle.
Oh, okay. So back in 2020, I started a podcast called Three Black Halflings. Originally, when we started, it was actually a D&D podcast. It's now more of just a general TTRPG and nerd stuff podcast, but it was a podcast talking about diversity and inclusivity in D&D in particular, and then eventually TTRPGs and nerd stuff in general. And I think it was in 2021 when we got contacted by D&D in a Castle, because we had done, the show got a lot more popular. It grew pretty quickly. And I think in 2021 is when we were contacted by you guys to be like, hey, do you guys want to come and DM for the first round of D&D in a Castle in, I guess, since 2019, since before the pandemic. And I had been DMing since 2019. And I think that year was when I first heard about D&D in a Castle. And I was like, oh, wow, that's wild. Wouldn't that be cool? And then fast forward, and then you guys are asking me to do it. And I'm like, well, yes. So it was really cool to, like, for something that I had seen years before and been like, wow, wouldn't that be amazing someday? Oh, well. And I had to
dreams do come true, Jeremy. Dreams do come true.
Yeah.
So how did you get into Dungeons and Dragons? How did you get into this nerdy world?
Well, I've been a nerd pretty much my whole life, but I hadn't actually played D&D until 2018, the end of 2018. I had played my first TTRPG in, I think, 2011, which was a game called Paradox Perfect, which we've done on Three Black Halflings a number of times. A really fun time travel TTRPG, but I hadn't really gotten into D&D, despite enjoying fantasy. I had read the Lord of the Rings books when I was like 8. I loved comic books. I really enjoyed science fiction, all that nerd stuff. But yeah, it was in 2018. I'd heard of D&D many times. My favorite show was Community, and one of their best episodes was a Dungeons and Dragons episode. I know that in Freaks and Geeks, I remember loving that show. They had Dungeons and Dragons in an episode. Obviously, Stranger Things had Dungeons and Dragons. So eventually a friend of mine, I think that the summer of 2018, I had asked to join a D&D game, and they were like, no. And then I was like, oh, okay. And then the fall, like around October of 2018, a friend of mine from drama school was like, hey, man, I'm going to set up a D&D game. Do you want to play? And I was like, okay. So I made a character, a gnome. He was a deep gnome druid named Greeble Longpike. And that was my very, very first D&D character back in October of 2018. And then fast forward to 2019, the guy who originally ran for us kind of went AWOL. And so it eventually came to a place where I was like, okay, if I want to play as much D&D as I want to play, because that first experience, I was hooked. After just the first game, I was like, oh yeah, this is great. This is awesome. I got to keep doing this. And then fast forward to, I think, February of 2019, I was finally like, okay, look, I'm not getting to play as much as I would want to. The only way to ensure that I get to play is if I start DMing. And so I got friends together from drama school, and then also from a play that I was doing at the time, which is how Jasper from Three Black Halflings really got into it, because he was in the cast of that show. And I was like, hey, man, do you want to come play D&D? And he'd played it like once years prior, but hadn't really gotten into it. And that campaign was what hooked him as well. So
you're the reason Jasper Cartwright is into D&D. That is, I did not know about that, Jeremy. That is really cool. I have a couple of questions here that have come in from our viewers. Hello to everybody who's watching. First question is, Jeremy, what makes D&D in a Castle so special for you?
Ooh, okay. So I think what makes D&D in a Castle really great from a DM standpoint. I think for any DM, the number one thing that you want from your players is buy-in, like emotional buy-in, where they're going to show up, and regardless of what kind of campaign you're going to run, you want players who want to play in that campaign, who really, really want to be there and are willing to invest, whether that's just emotionally in the fiction or just invest strategically, where you're like, look, even if it's just like a dungeon crawl, people are like, okay, I'm going to be focused. I'm going to be like excited to be here. I'm going to be looking at all, looking for all the traps and all the secrets of this dungeon. Or if it's something that's really dramatic and has tons of role play, you want people who are going to show up and be like, okay, regardless of whatever acting experience I may have, I'm going to invest emotionally and believe in this world we're creating together. And I think D&D in a Castle really facilitates pulling those sorts of tables together. Just consistently, the people who show up to D&D in a Castle have a very high degree of buy-in, where they're like, they've come to play. And so it's like, oh, great. As a DM, it makes the job way easier because you don't have to work as hard to get people invested. They're already there, and you can go a lot further, I think, because of that.
Cool. And how do you prepare for a campaign like this? Is one of the questions from our viewers. Do you make more than one option for people to choose from? How do you prepare, and how much do you prepare? What's that process like leading up to the castle?
It really varies according to what kind of campaign I'm going to run. I think the first few times I did it, I just sort of said, hey, everybody, this is what I've decided to run. And then people were like, okay, and that was what we did. And then this time, for the last couple, I think 2 or 3 times I've run it, I think I've pitched multiple ideas and had people choose. And then and I'll have come up with different campaigns that I'm like, I would enjoy running any of these. And then people will select one. And what consistently happens is, even after they've selected it, even when I would just pitch them the original idea, typically it would be in a setting that I either had already, I've never actually run a D&D in a campaign in a pre-made like official setting. I don't normally run games there. I usually run in games in my own homebrew settings. So for the very first one, Jasper and I actually co-DM'd a table, and we created a world. I think he'd originally had the idea for a world that had tons and tons of dragons in it and was really focused in on dragons. And so we were like, okay, so essentially what we did, whenever I'm like making a new world, what I'll often do is brainstorm. I might do research if I'm creating a world that's inspired by a real world location or culture. So for example, the past one I just did in July took inspiration from East African civilizations, such as Aksum or Kush. And like, obviously those are civilizations that existed hundreds of years apart, but like sort of took, and a little bit of Egypt in there as well, because especially Kush had a lot of overlap with Egypt, back and forth. Egypt conquered the land of Kush for a while, then Kush actually conquered Egypt for a while. So there's a lot of cultural exchange. But I basically looked at those elements, looked at the architecture, looked at elements of the religion, looked at elements of how the government was run, and then created a scenario based around, like created a setting based around that, and a scenario that fit with what I'd pitched to the players. And that's usually what ends up happening. So a lot of work goes into the initial premise, and then usually coming up with what some variation of the end goal is going to be, or at least what a major end goal can be going in. And then I usually do a lot of writing during the process as well. Because of course, when the fact is, you're playing 24 hours of D&D in 3 days. Like, you can't plan for every single contingency. You can come up with options that let people choose from them, which is what we did the very first time. We were like, okay, let's come up with like 3 or 4 different scenarios that say you can go with these guys, or these guys. What I've done on subsequent ones is usually pitch people the premise up front. And so the direction that they're going in is kind of already agreed upon. And then what they encounter along the way is where the choices come in, and then it just becomes reactive. So I will have come up with various possible scenarios in my mind, but it'll just be like for example, the second time I did it, it was you're transporting something. People aren't telling you what it is, but you're transporting something to a place, and you know that you're going through bandit territory, and so you're very likely to get jumped. So be careful. And in people's backstories, they had different stuff about like different bandit groups and stuff like that. So that I wove in those bandit groups
Mhm.
into the story of what then happened. So it's like, you guys get attacked, and then this happens, and then, you know, all of this. And so then it becomes a lot of writing during the event just to react to what they've done. But in terms of initial preparation, I just put a lot of most of my focus goes on building the world, and then building the premise, and then a general direction for where I think it could go.
Cool. And someone you've mentioned that you don't run in pre-built stuff. You're a bit of a world builder, DM.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like, and we have learned. Jeremy, what's the most overpowered homebrew item? Speaking of homebrew, it's a question from our audience. And what is the favorite homebrew you have made? So,
oh boy, most overpowered homebrew item was one that I made really, really early on. It was a magic piano that when you attuned to it, it would have an additional number of spell slots equal to your spellcaster level. So like so if you were, for example, a level 4 wizard, it would have 4 additional spell slots, and you could choose each of those spells. Like you could first level spell, you could use those spell slots to cast additional spells. So you could cast a first level spell slot using 1 slot, a second level spell using 2 slots, third level spell using 3 slots, fourth level spell using 4 slots. So you get at, you know, if you're a level 20 character, if you're a level 20 wizard, theoretically you could cast an additional 2 9th level spells with that item. So it's not crazy at low levels, but the higher you get,
yeah.
the more absurd it becomes. And so that was probably the most overpowered one, because it just didn't occur to me how powerful that was going to be in the end.
Was that you who had that, or did somebody
No,
in
I
your
made that
campaign?
up. I made
Oh,
that
you?
up. Yeah, it was in the very first campaign I ever ran. I made that item up.
How to
In
write
fact, it was in the one that
unbalanced magic
Jasper was in.
items.
Yeah, I did not realize how good, like how overpowered that was going to be. That was back when I was like, they were level 5 characters, and I was giving them like +3 weapons, because I was like, well, only 3? It's only a +3. Who cares? It's not a +5 or anything like that. So, and then what's my favorite? I don't know that I have just one favorite. I enjoy. I've come up with a lot of homebrew items for the world of Utarum, which is a world that I used for the second campaign I ever ran at D&D in a Castle, and also on Three Black Halflings for our show Outlaws and Obelisks. I came up with a number of like North Africa inspired magic items for that. So I had like, I think they were called the omnidirectional cobcobs. Cobcobs are these slippers that are sort of on these little platforms that allow people. I think people have used them at times to walk. Like if you don't want to step in something nasty, it elevates you like a several inches above. So if you put these on, you can use them not just to avoid walking on something nasty, but to avoid walking on the ground. So you could like activate them and just walk straight up in the air, walk upside down. You could walk in any direction. I really enjoyed that one. I have there's the toothpick of chill, where if you have the toothpick in, you then get like a breath weapon, because it's like a minty fresh toothpick that lets you shoot out ice. I had, because Outlaws and Obelisks also has like a Western vibe there, I had a sheriff's badge that you could activate, and it would basically it would function like the light cleric's warding flare ability to like impose disadvantage on an attack roll. I had a bunch of them for that campaign in particular. That were really
well,
fun.
we're getting so many questions, Jeremy. You
I'll give
must have a
shorter
lot
answers.
of people who want to hear about your DMing and learn from you. First one is, what is one of your favorite ways to have a party meet in a first session?
Ooh, oh man. My favorite way to have a party meet is to not have them. I don't usually want to have them meet by chance. I usually want them to meet for a reason. So they have been assembled specifically for a reason, so that they have like a built-in reason to be working together. I would say if they have to meet as part of the campaign, then I want them to meet being assembled for a reason, typically. So they're like, oh, okay, it's not just that we run into each other and we decide that we have common goals. No, we know we have common goals, and we have to set out on this adventure together.
Cool. And do you give those to, so at D&D in a Castle, for those who haven't been, the DM and the players get to meet up in a tavern, the digital tavern, before the event, and all of that is shared. Do you share that kind of thing before you get to the castle and have your prologue in session 0, or is that something you bring to the table at the start of the event?
A lot of times it's part of the premise. So I have had like some campaigns where they've met randomly, but a lot of times it's like, okay, as part of the pitch for this campaign, you guys are going on this mission, which means that you're already in league with each other. So that's kind of the agreed upon thing. Like the one I just did in July, there was, as part of the original premise, that they were basically the premier team of adventurers and heroes in this kingdom. In this empire, actually, they were the empire's premier heroes. So they were there. Then the players got to like name the organization that they were a part of, and they came up with like roles, connections that they had with other people in government and stuff like that. So that was like we created a backstory for their group together for that one. But it really varies according to the campaign.
Cool. The other next question is, do you find you use improvisation a lot, given the group can often go off on a tangent or miss obvious clues a lot? I know you have an acting background, so does that involve a lot of improv as well?
Yeah, it does. A lot of times it really depends, but yeah, in general, I have to like you can come up with a general framework, but at least for me, I then have to fill in the blanks along the way. I usually have enough of a framework where I'll have a general idea of which NPCs I need up front, so I'll usually have names for them and usually have like an idea of their personality and stuff. But this past time at D&D in a Castle, we actually did a split campaign where the premise was the first half of the campaign was them as these great heroes, the premier heroes of the kingdom, trying to save the day, trying to stop the bad guys from destroying the world, essentially, from destroying the kingdom. And then the second half of the campaign took place several hundred years later after the previous set of heroes failed. And so a new set of heroes were trying to pick up the pieces and move forward after the cataclysm that those previous heroes had failed to prevent. And the second half of that campaign used a ton of stuff from the first half of the campaign, which meant I couldn't write that much stuff ahead of time, which meant that the first session of that was almost entirely improvised. Like I basically 4 straight hours of, I had a basic framework and then just filled in the blanks. I had an entire chase sequence with a roll table that I was making up as we went. It was just like, roll a d6 to see what you encounter. They'd tell me and I'd be like, okay, a 3. That must mean it's this. And that was really fun. It ended up, actually, one of the characters they met during that chase sequence ended up being the most popular NPC of the campaign. And it was just something I made up right on the spot. So
that's awesome. Another question is, how do you get the game, and this relates to improv in terms of letting the tangents run away, but how do you get the game to fit closely to the time constraints? So this is a format that, at D&D in a Castle, for those who haven't been, you play 2 4-hour sessions each day for 3 days, plus a prologue session and session 0 on the day you actually arrive at the castle. So it's 24 total hours, 24 plus in the case of Jeremy Cobb, 24 plus a lot. Generally speaking, guaranteed 24, but very often a lot more. So do you get it to fit in the time constraints, and how do you manage the time constraints, or not manage them as it might be?
I've never really had too much difficulty with people getting to stuff, I think, at D&D in a Castle earlier than I wanted, because at worst comes to worst, you can always throw up a combat, or a lot of times I'll give players an opportunity to decompress, like the characters. So there'll be sections where it'll be like, what is your character thinking or feeling? And we'll go around and everybody will kind of describe where their character is at emotionally and mentally right now. So, and then people can play out scenes, because oftentimes, there'll be drama that is happening in between the characters. In the case of somebody getting to something before I had planned it, or a mystery, I'm trying to think. I don't know that I've ever run just a straightforward whodunit type mystery at D&D in a Castle, because that's very risky. I think it's the more you do that, the more it's like, okay, everybody, here's the clues. Yeah, you have to move them along, or if they get too close. I think in a case like that, the goal would be to have contingencies. So rather than having the big bad be right where in an accessible place early on, I usually have them in a place that is literally impossible to access right from the get-go. The closest, I will say, this past time, or before I jump to that, I think the idea is to have lieutenants and other obstacles that you have in reserve that you can throw in if need be, or like plan for the characters potentially to run into the big bad early, but then say, okay, I need an out. Like if they run into the big bad needs to get away. Or the big bad needs to do something to them. And that's where the improv could come in. For example, if you want them, if they're growing levels during the course of the campaign, maybe the big bad is too strong for them initially. And they don't know what stat block you're using. Change the stat block, have the big bad defeat them, or have the big bad run away and gather more power. Even if you kill some of them, you can include some sort of an afterlife scenario where they can maybe try and come back from the dead, or maybe there's like a side quest where they go and try and resurrect characters, and you can have people build new characters on the fly. I did that once where somebody's character, I think 2 characters died, and they ended up having like intermittent characters until their previous characters got resurrected. It was a whole series of things. But this past time, it actually got real close. I forgot about this until this very moment. The first battle, not the big bad, but the closest thing we had to a big bad at that point, almost got taken out and just barely managed to escape. And as that was happening, I was thinking of like, okay, what contingencies could I have in place? Somebody from the bad guy team then has to get away. There has to be something, like somebody involved in this is going to need to escape. And so I need a new replacement. So in that moment, I was like behind the scenes sweating like, okay, because if they don't manage to get away, then I'm going to need someone else who's already been mentioned. So it would have just been slotting somebody else into that spot, I guess, in that case.
Cool. We've got a bunch more questions. I'm gonna jump ahead because I want to talk a little bit about D&D in a Castle itself and your appearance at D&D in a Castle. We just have one little question for me, which is how accessible is the castle for an old guy with a cane? I'm 75 and still crazy about D&D. Yeah, we definitely have people with mobility restrictions come to the castle. The castle is a luxury hotel, so it does have accommodations for mobility needs. Does have an elevator, and although it is a castle, it's uneven and it's not always 100%, all modern conveniences, but it is a functioning hotel, and we can definitely accommodate people with mobility restrictions and have done so in the past.
Even at my tables in the past. One of the
Yeah.
PCs who died in that one campaign was played by a person with mobility issues, and they were able to use the elevator in the hotel and everything like that. Even with I think they had a mobility scooter.
Yeah, and we always want to make it as accessible as possible. So if you have specific needs, talk to us and we'll figure out solutions. We want everybody to be able to enjoy D&D in the Castle and have an incredible vacation. So I've got a bunch of questions about your games, but I want to ask you before I get to those about the campaigns themselves that you're planning to run. You are coming in November 4th to 8th in the UK at Lumley Castle, and you're also coming in the spring, March 24th to 28th. So if you're interested in playing in Jeremy's game, you can go to dndinacastle.com to find that. The spring dates are at the QR code in the top left-hand corner. So what have you got, first of all, planned for the spring? Let's talk about the spring event, because that has the most space in it. I think you only have one seat left in the full.
So I've really enjoyed pitching ideas to groups. And what I've been doing so far is whatever ideas they don't use, I will then reuse for future ideas. So actually, I can read to you the 2 that they didn't pick for this upcoming fall, and I'll probably include at least one of these as options, if not both of these as options. One of them I called Dragon Palooza. It's actually set in that world I talked about that Jasper and I made. That's filled with dragons. I'll read it to you dramatically. In a world where dragons and humanoids live side by side, a group of faithful embark on a mission to retrieve a relic for their secret holy order. Along the way, they'll face treacherous landscapes, rival factions, and the weight of destiny. This campaign would be set in Udraco. It's a super dragon-heavy setting, but the dragons come in all shapes, sizes, looks, etc. We're talking, your standard dragons, but we also have fungal dragons, we have astral dragons, we have like psychic dragons, both gem dragons and otherwise. Heck, the legend has it that even the entire planet is one big dragon. So that's probably one of the ones that I'll end up pitching, because both times I pitched it, people have been like, "Oh, that's really cool, but I'd rather do this one slightly more." So I'm like, "All right, well, it's still a good idea. I'll just keep including it until somebody picks it." Another one that I might include from this that I just pitched to this past group is Plague Detectives. A group of brave travelers arrives in a town in a region ravaged by a strange and horrifying plague. Their mission: to solve a series of murders and preserve the lives of the citizenry. Will they stop the dark forces at work before their lives too are taken? Mystery, intrigue, and plenty of creepiness await. So that's another one that I would pitch, I think.
Cool.
I don't know what I'll do for the third one, but I usually try to give at least 3 options for that.
Cool. And in terms of, we've talked about, improving, and you obviously have a theatrical background. In terms of your style of DMing at the table, which say of the pillars do you think that you're the most drawn to? Which one is the one you have to work a little more to sort of work into your campaign? I mean, everybody draws on all 3, but there's usually like, that's my thing. That's one I'm a little bit need to work on, and the other is somewhere down the middle. How would you sort of rate those?
So the 3 pillars are what? Action, exploration, and role play?
Yeah, role play, exploration, and combat, I think.
Combat, yeah.
Action,
I was counting action as combat. I would say combat and role play are the ones that come the easiest. I think exploration is something that I've been working on more and more. This past campaign, especially in the second half, we had a lot of travel. People were having to explore, like run across the landscape, because there was a lot of like army movements, and people like they were trying to protect a community of people, so they were hiding in these caves, and it was like trying to infiltrate the enemy camp and walking for miles per day. So we had a lot more exploration stuff in that particular one. People were taking on levels of exhaustion like crazy. I've never handed out so many levels of exhaustion, so many scenes of people trying to hide from scouting parties and like that sort of stuff. So that's something that I've been developing a lot more recently, but definitely I think my strengths are combats and role play. I think those are the ones that I tend to rely on the most.
Cool. So if someone was looking at all our dungeon masters and they were thinking, which game would I be interested in? What kind of player do you think would be drawn to your table? And do you think there's a kind of player, and everybody tries to accommodate the players that are at their table, but people have different interests, and even really great DMs might not be the right DM for somebody else. How would you direct somebody who was looking at the games and picking their dungeon master? Who would be the player that would be most excited about your game?
Okay, so people, I think the things in my game that the kind of player who would, I think, enjoy my game would be somebody who enjoys the tactical side of D&D. If you don't enjoy combat at all, then I probably am not your person. Although I then would suggest maybe D&D is not necessarily the best system if you just completely hate combat. But I really enjoy combat. Especially challenging combats. I like to make combats that are going to have you looking at your sheet being like, okay, look, what else can I try on here? What's like the more high stakes they can get. And I don't usually like to do a lot of random encounters either. I usually, maybe like there's a random encounter table as part of a larger combat, but usually I like to have like story-driven combats and encounters. And so the stakes usually end up feeling quite high emotionally. And so people who enjoy those kinds of stakes where it's like, a comparison would be the emotional stakes of a fight, like if you watch like The Empire Strikes Back, where the choreography is almost secondary in that fight to like, oh my God, is Luke going to be able to survive this? What's going to happen? The atmosphere, it's all really scary. And then of course we have good choreography. The combat is mechanically engaging and challenging as well. But aside from all the combat stuff, I love role play. I love having characters go on journeys. I love characters learning things about themselves and changing as people, discovering things about the world, being put in. I love characters with strong relationships, either with each other or with other elements of the world. High emotional stakes. I love making players cry because of like big story things and because of where things have gone, and that's happened several times actually at a lot of D&D.
A lot of the castles, a lot of investment, as you said at the beginning.
Yeah.
The players are invested, so when things happen, it matters deeply.
Yeah, and that's, I think, a player who loves role play and loves those kinds of scenes, and even if you don't love to necessarily act, but if you enjoy describing what your character does and you enjoy emotionally investing in your character's experiences beyond just the experience of trying to get treasure or trying to make it through fights and that sort of thing, I think you'll enjoy my games. If you enjoy comedy, there's usually a fair amount of laughs in my games, even when they're more heavy and dark toned. I like to still include like light, funny moments, so that it's not just like, oh my god. But I enjoy like tension. I remember the second game I ever ran. People I think on day 2 were like, I have been clenching this whole day, because it's just been 8 hours of just like, oh, because it
Bring
was
your
just
massage gun to the Jeremy Cobb game.
yeah, and that's the thing. It wasn't even like there weren't even like horror elements. Well, there was a little bit, but it was mostly just like, the situation is so dangerous. What are we gonna do? And then at the end of that, when we finally take a break and all the characters are like, then the downtime feels that much more rewarding, I think, and then you can have that much more development. I remember at the end of that day, a character fully changed his subclass. I think somebody may have changed their name. Like all the characters are like, I'm a different person after this experience. And it's not even day 3. So I think if you like that, if you like those kinds of vibes, and also I will say, if you like worlds that tend to skew away from the classic straightforward like vaguely Euro medieval fantasy vibes, I like to incorporate influences from a lot of other time periods and cultures and that sort of thing. So if you enjoy settings and that incorporate those kinds of elements, such as the second one I ever ran was in a North Africa inspired Western setting. I ran a Redwall themed game where everybody was anthropomorphic animals in a setting inspired by Al-Andalus, Muslim controlled Spain. During the Taifa period specifically, if you ever want to look that up. I've done this past one, as I said, East Africa inspired, sort of a solar punk East Africa inspired setting. And typically I try to run games in such a way that, like, whatever background you come from, it's not going to be like something you can't fit in with. It's just going to be the setting feels different than what you're normally used to. But typically people I've had more than once people say, let me know when you publish the source book for this, because people really, really love the settings that I end up making.
Very cool. I've got a couple of questions here from the viewers, and I'm going to do a little quick fire with you. But I first just want to say, it sounds like everybody wants to learn how to DM from Jeremy Cobb. They all want to know your tips and tricks, Jeremy. So I do want to say that if you're thinking about coming as the viewers, if you're thinking about coming to D&D Castle in the fall, we are doing something novel this year, which is a little bit of a revival of something we did before the pandemic, which is called Castle Days, which is the few days between the 2 back-to-back rounds of D&D Castle that we have. And we're inviting our talent to provide some workshops, some Q&As, some hands-on sort of tutoring to help people develop their skills as a dungeon master, and potentially some of those are even geared towards developing a career in dungeon mastering as well. A little bit of industry stuff there from our amazing professionals that we have running our games at D&D Castle. So that was sort of by demand of our guests, that they'd love to learn from our dungeon masters. So people will have the opportunity to learn from our dungeon masters if they come either staying after the first round or coming early for the second round, or coming to both, because why not? There's an opportunity to stay between rounds and learn a little bit and get to hang out and nerd out with our dungeon masters. But I'll give you some quick fire questions before we go, because we're getting near the end of our time. The first one is, what do you find the most difficult about making a homebrew setting, whether because it's boring for you or just takes a lot, and how do you deal with it?
Most difficult thing about making a homebrew setting is maybe the research. I enjoy the research, but if trying to incorporate it in a way that feels trying to incorporate elements from the world in a way that feels like, oh, this is fun. We can slot this in like a cool, fun way that is easy, I guess, to build a framework around. Maybe that would. It's also some of the most fun aspects of building a homebrew setting. But I think the research just takes more time than if I can just go to I don't know, Forgotten Realms wiki and be like, okay, that's what that god is. That's what the history of this particular city. Great. You now have to create all of that yourself and generate all of that yourself. Which I will give a tip: if you are building a homebrew setting for a specific group of players, ask the players to help build parts of it that pertain to their character. So
Mhm.
have them say, like, work with them, say, hey, what part of this world are you from? What is the location like? And then you can throw out ideas. If what they're suggesting doesn't 100% line up with what you're suggesting,
Well,
you can kind of mold it into something where it's like, oh, now a huge amount of the creative energy of this is coming from everybody else. I mentioned the players from my last round came up with the name of their culture. I used questions also from the Kids on Bikes town building, the world building questions on the Kids on Bikes system, to ask the players, like, hey, what is something about this empire that is, what's a rumor about this place? What's a nearby country, and what's our relationship to them? What do people think is terrible about this place? What do people think is awesome about this place? Those sorts of questions, and outsourcing them to the players, because then the more creative input they have, a lot of times the more investment now they will
mhm,
feel
mhm.
in building this setting going, and in playing in this setting and preserving the setting.
Cool. Next question. What percentage of the campaigns you've run have ended where you thought it would end, and how many went off in a wild direction?
Oh man. I think all of them probably have ended in a place that I didn't really think of prior to us starting. I think it's usually I'll have created the ending or some version of the ending partway through. I'll come up with a lot of details about the premise. I'll come up with a good like midpoint. Like this is like the first big thing we got to do, and then we'll figure out, we'll figure out where we go from there. And that's usually what ends up happening is I usually have very little idea of where exactly something's going to end when we first start.
All right. All right. Question for Jeremy from his Discord server. How do you ensure that your campaigns uphold the values and tenets of the pile?
Ha! Who asked this one? Wait, let me see. Silly Moose, thank you. The values and tenets of the pile. We have to ensure that whoever is standing in the way of goodness and rightness, or at least in the way of our protagonists, their souls must be taken and added to the great pile. And I think we have to, essentially, you do it by saying, hey, players, here's agency. Here are the bad guys. If you want to somehow defeat the bad guys, here is your opportunity. I think it's frustrating to play in a game where there are villainous figures who are completely untouchable. And I think you need to give the opportunity. Like, if there's a figure who seems untouchable at first, I think then we have a story of how the players gain enough power or gain the ability then to defeat said evil bad person that they want to take down. So even if the person is just a random NPC that they all hate, giving them an opportunity to get one over on that person, I think is really the answer, is consistently giving all of the players agency. And thank you, Martian. My Discord has invaded this chat, and I love it.
I love it too. I love it. People are eager to chat with you. Jeremy, what is your policy for fudging rolls as a DM to keep your players alive? Or do you just, is there fatality? Like, how do you,
Yeah,
do you interfere or not?
I usually ask ahead of time, are you guys comfortable with your characters dying? Because as far as I'm concerned, if we're not letting characters die, what are we doing here? Not that I'm out here to just kill characters, but what are the
The
stakes?
risk isn't
If we're
real.
having, if we're having most fights, obviously you can have fights where the stakes are not life or death for your specific character. But if most fights, it's your specific character, can you accomplish your goal and survive in the process? So I would talk to them ahead of time and say, hey, either come up with backup characters, or we will come up with ways to bring you back in, because I'm not going to have you sitting out for 4 hours because your character died. It'll be your character died, and now it's part of the story to bring your character back and how that affects them. That's probably what I would say. So I don't really fudge rolls that much. If I'm fudging rolls, it's maybe because it's rare that I do it, but it's maybe because I'm like, look, this battle is not tough enough. So they hit. Congratulations, they hit. I don't know if I've ever fudged a crit. I think I'm just like, oh, they hit one of their 3 attacks. Because even though they had a plus 11, they rolled like a 2, a 3, and a 1. And I decided that one of those is actually a hit, so that we can actually have some tension in this fight. It's one thing I'll see be this. If the players come with a great strategy and just destroy, then that's fine. But if it's like just horrible rolls ruining the opportunity for this bad guy to be able to do anything, I would rather they do at least one thing to bring a little tension to the combat.
Right. Cool. So if you've been watching, we've been chatting with Jeremy Cobb, Dungeon Master of D&D in a Castle, and he is going to be at our fall round of D&D in a Castle, October 30. Nope. November 1st.
November 4th through 8th.
4th, thank you. There's so many dates in my head. November 4th till 8th at Lumley Castle, UK. I think there's one seat left at his campaign there, and then also has seats.
Do you want me to read what that one is? Do you want to read
Let's hear what that campaign is.
Yeah.
Yes, tell us.
Because I found the campaign. I found the third campaign that I'm likely to pitch in the spring, but I also have the campaign that we're doing this time.
Okay, let's
so
hear.
I will read this campaign. Let me see. Where's looking through my notes here for where I put. Aha! Here it is. The Never-Ending Fortress. This is the one that they voted on. A band of adventurers pursues their greatest foe, one who has stolen something or someone that's incredibly dear to each of them. Little do they know that their pursuit will take them to places they never could have imagined. Can they reclaim what was taken and make it out with their lives and souls intact? We're talking challenging combats, surreal environments, and self-discovery. And essentially some of the inspiration for this one is like The Dark Tower, if you've ever read the Dark Tower series, especially the beginning where it's just a gunslinger chasing a man in black across the desert, and we're not entirely sure why. Also a little bit of like Dream logic there, where it's like you're here, you kind of know who you are, but you're not clear on exactly how you ended up chasing this person. Maybe you're not even sure what they took, but you know they took something, and you know you have to catch them. And then along the way, we get to learn more about who you are, how you got here, and what exactly is going on in this bizarre landscape, this bizarre world that you seem to have found yourself inside of.
Fun, very mysterious. Love it. So that's the campaign that Jeremy's going to be running November 4th to 8th at D&D in a Castle in the UK. And then Jeremy will be back again in the spring with another exciting campaign for the rounds of March 24th to 28th. 2025. So you can come to dndinacastle.com and read all about Jeremy, read all about his campaigns, read all about the events themselves. And if you have any questions, there's a live chat there where you can reach out to us, or you can reach out to us on social media or by email. There's lots of ways to find us, and we're real people behind here, like manually answering all of your questions. So we'd love to help you get to the castle. But Jeremy, I'm going to ask you to take us out with an invitation to the viewers to come and join you for a campaign at D&D in a Castle at one of your next tables.
Yes, please come and join me. There's one spot available this November. This spot just waiting for you to fill it. It's going to be a lot of high adventure, a lot of mystery, a lot of weirdness, perhaps some big, hopefully some big emotional moments, some absolutely nutty combats that are just going to be bizarre and very challenging. And then come and join me in the spring where it's still undecided. I already mentioned the Dragonpalooza option and also the Plague Detectives option, but I just found what will likely be the third one, which is Chronicles of Narnia meets Annihilation. The premise of this is that a group of normal humans, maybe even teenagers, enters a magical world and begins gradually transforming into fantasy versions of themselves, gaining magic powers and becoming D&D races along the way. There would be tons of classical fantasy stuff, so prophecies, big battles, romance, etc. And I'd also want to incorporate parallel elements from each of the PC's lives, like how the people Dorothy meets in The Wizard of Oz correspond to people she knows in Kansas. This would be more about coming of age, getting to live out one's fantasies, and deciding whether it's truly what you want. And obviously, I know mentioning Annihilation in the movie calls to mind a lot of horror stuff, but we don't necessarily have to lean in that direction. Or we absolutely can if y'all want to, but we don't have to. The changes would be surprising and potentially alarming, but they don't need to necessarily be horrifying. And this would also take place in a brand new setting made specifically for this game.
Amazing. Well, that sounds like so much fun, Jeremy. I think your players were going to have a wonderful time at both events. They always do. They always tell us how much they love playing in your games and can't wait to come back and do it again. So we look forward to seeing you at the castle, and I look forward to seeing all of you watchers, all of you viewers at the castle as well soon. And we will see you there.
Bye.